Hey, welcome back. I'm not Classic Gaming Quarterly. My name's Derek. If you guys remember, I usually give a shout out to Chris over at Classic Gaming Quarterly because really he kind of gave me I guess you could say maybe the confidence to try streaming, and it's something I've been doing now roughly around the COVID crisis. I'm sure a lot of people have done stuff like that. I picked up really in the last probably a month or so. I know I have it titled July, but that's when I decided to set it. Later this week, I'll do like a more traditional stream. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask in the chat, and I'll answer them as I see them. It's obviously with a stream like this, it's a lot easier to do that. But again, shout out to Chris at Classic Gaming Quarterly for again giving me the idea or the want to share those memories, so to speak. So the first item I'm going to share with you guys is something that's video game related, but it's not actually a video game per se. And maybe you'll find this, I don't know, sad. But one of my favorite series is, of course, Mega Man. And these are, that's kind of cool how it works as a pistol here. These are Mega Man sleeves by the company Dragon Shield, and these are card sleeves I use them for Magic the Gathering cards, and so when I saw that they had made Mega Man sleeves, I know that they've already made sleeves for like Super Mario Brothers and Zelda, but we haven't seen the Blue Bomber yet. So when I saw that offered on Legion's website, Legion is a company that makes sleeves out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota, I believe. And so I had to jump all over that. And so there's this one where it's just Mega Man himself, classic character going back to the NES days, or known as Rockman in Japan. So this would be Rockman, I guess, if this was bought in Japan. Dragon Shield has been making card sleeves forever. They're out of Denmark. They do real nice, high quality sleeves. Here's another one, Mega Man themed again, and this is really the only two I believe they had. So here's Mega Man and Rush, which is this kind of helper kind of robot that can change different forms to what Mega Man needs to get moving around in the stages. But otherwise, the sides are the same. But so on the back of those sleeves, you'd see this. And on the sleeves here, this is really what you would see. But like I said, for myself as a Mega Man fan, I just couldn't resist. So like I said, it's video game related, but it's not video games per se. So hope you thought that was cool like I did. I guess going back, one other it's video game related, but not a video game, and that is this is a wireless controller. This is 8-bit DOS M30 wireless controller, so it's just a 6-button controller that you would use for like a Sega Genesis. And this is what I've been using in my last few streams, especially when I've been doing games on my Mega SG analog console. And I can't really say anything bad about this controller. It's been fantastic. Obviously, something being wireless gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of where you sit and play games. But the controller itself is really well made. I know that some people have criticized it on different channels. I probably don't play enough to really work the crap out of the controller where it starts giving me a lot of problems. But I like this actually over the first-party Sega Genesis controllers. Partly because I think the buttons are a little bit better set in the controller. Like if you used a 6-button Genesis controller from Sega, I always felt the buttons kind of were, I don't know, they almost stuck out too much. And so I always kind of felt like even though they were pretty soft pushes, in other words, you didn't have to apply a lot of pressure, I still felt it was a long way to travel. And these are set a little bit deeper, and for me, it feels like it's more comfortable. But either way, this has been a really this has really been helpful because I must admit I'm not a big fan of the traditional 3-button Sega Genesis controller. And so this gives me that 6-button controller with, of course, the convenience of a wireless setup. And 8-Bit Do, I thought, did a really good job. I think, me personally, I really like this controller a lot. I know they also have another controller that's for the Super Nintendo, the N30. And, again, has mixed reviews, but I don't know, at least for myself, the M30 has been a good controller for me, and I'll probably keep using this for a really long time. So if you want an endorsement from me, Derek, I think 8-Bit Do has it for me, at least. Okay, moving on to some games. We'll start with some Nintendo games, or Nintendo tapes, as Bithead 1000 might say. This first one is actually a game I saw on DeForte's channel. Daryl does a great, he actually streams quite a bit. I would probably say 3 to 4 times a week, if not more than that. And most of the time he does RPGs, usually PC based, which are really cool. I really enjoy watching those. Daryl's a great guy. But on occasion he also does NES games, which he does off of an emulator. And this was a game I actually first saw on his channel. And the game is FCI's Zanac. Now, this is a vertically scrolling shooter that you don't really hear talked about too much. The game itself was developed by Compile, and if you know anything about shooters, Compile is kind of almost like one of the elite, I guess you'd say, developers of shooters in Japan. And they're known for making very difficult but very intense shooters. And Zanac is all of that. Now, the amazing thing to me is that Zanac is actually a fairly old game. I believe when you boot this up, I think it says 1986. 86, I believe. And you can see the compile at the bottom. And this game is all kinds of crazy. There's a lot of different weapon upgrades you can get, which you normally don't see in a Nintendo shooter. You come to expect something like that out of like something for like the 16-bit era, for like the Super Nintendo or better yet the Sega Genesis. But you don't expect to see a lot of variety in the upgrades you can get for your ship. Typical space shooter, meaning that's what I'm saying, that you do in Zanac. And this one's really intense. I would say it has a very steep learning curve, while memorization is always the key to shooters. This one is downright cruel. The action's pretty fast. The one thing that's they have, as you vertically scroll through the game, if there's any, I guess, gripe I have with it, is that the backgrounds are such that it makes it really hard to see the enemy projectiles. So you almost kind of feel like you're flying through like an invisible minefield of enemy bullets. And so while you're, of course, maneuvering away, you don't usually see what gets you. And that can be frustrating. So while the game is very well done, in some ways, the fact that the bullets almost seem invisible makes it frustrating, just because you feel like like it's just a matter of time before you hit something and you're dead, no matter how skilled you may feel you are, just because it's so hard to see them, and you're almost really just taking some kind of zigzaggy pattern to avoid what you can, but all it takes is being at the wrong place at the wrong time and you're dead. But it is a fun game. When your spaceship explodes, spoiler alert, it has one of the cooler explosions that I've ever seen, at least out of a NES game, which is, that's saying something. There's some pretty good explosions out there, but this one was pretty unique. And like I said, when you consider that it's a game that was copyrighted back in 1986, it's pretty impressive. And I don't know, it's a game you don't hear people talk about. Zanac. It's not a psychotropic drug like Xanax, I think it is. But Zanac by FCI. look for it. It's a real good one. You don't see it all that often in the wild, so, but it's really not that expensive either. Maybe $16, $17. So it's not gonna set you back a ton, but it's a cool game. Okay, this next one is a game I actually played on a stream, and I'll actually tag that stream in the show description when I'm done streaming here. This is Tiger Heli by Acclaim. You can find Tiger Heli at virtually any retro game store at all, because it was a title that was at every store. It was one of those games that you could easily find. The thing that's interesting is, of course, is that it's Acclaim, which usually Acclaim is not really well known for having quality games, but Tiger Heli isn't too bad. The one thing I would complain is I do think you have a bit of a large hitbox, but Tiger Heli is actually a shooter, a vertically scrolling shooter by Toaplan, which again is another company that has a pretty good reputation for creating quality shooters. And it's a fun one. It's probably not my favorite one as far as these vertically scrolling shooters that Toaplan made. They actually made 3 of them. The other was being Sky Shark, and the other being Twin Cobra by American Sammy. I'd probably say Tiger Heli is my third best out of those 3. Twin Cobra being first, and beneath that would be a Sky Shark. But it's okay, and it's easy to get a hold of. So if you want the Toaplan shooter experience on the NES for cheap, Tiger Heli is probably your best bet. That or Sky Shark. Twin Cobra is a little bit tougher to find in the wild, but even that's not too expensive. But not a bad game. Probably one of the better Acclaim titles for the NES. This next game was a game I remember seeing on Nintendo Power back in the day, but I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me. I know that there's been lots of different maybe gaming channels that talk about like deceiving cover art, and this one, I don't know if I wouldn't say it's deceiving, but you don't really know what you're getting into necessarily completely. And I mean, you got a guy there who looks like he's in a spacesuit, holding the reins of what looks like a horse, and then an American flag, and then in the background it looks like he's maybe like on one of the moons of Mars or something. And well, that's really kind of what it is, believe it or not. The game is called M.U.L.E. I do not remember what that an acronym stands for, but the way the game works is you go to these planets and you are kind of there to develop, I guess, almost like a colony. So think of yourself as almost like a homesteader. And then after that, the game kind of plays like a mix of, I guess, what you call Wall Street Kid, because you have these commodities that are traded, and you're also trying to, because you use that to earn money, and then you use that money to build your kind of, I guess, your ranch or your colony or whatever. And it's really odd, to say the least. I was expecting something a little more, I don't know. I was expecting more of a platformer, and I didn't get that at all. It's kind of a weird commodity trading / Settlers of Catan kind of thing, where you're gathering different resources to build your little base. And without a manual, I really felt really lost and kind of clueless as to what I was really supposed to be doing. So I played it for about 25 minutes, not really sure that I accomplished anything of significance, and said to myself, I'm going to have to read more about this to try it again. But a unique game, not terribly expensive, but definitely not one you see all that much in the wild, but very unique to say the least. It's by Mindscape, and I don't know. It's a unique game to say the least. Okay, this next one probably doesn't need much of an introduction. This is Wild Gunman, the classic light gun shooter, one of the black box games for the NES. Kind of famously portrayed in Back to the Future Part 2, where it was called a baby's game by the kids. I never really played Wild Gunman when I was a kid. I vaguely remember seeing it at the Nintendo top. What is it? They had an arcade cabinet that used to be at arcades, and you could play Nintendo games. And I remember Wild Gunman was a choice, but because they had a couple light guns games. But most of the time I played Duck Hunt because that was the only one that I really knew. And this is supposed to be like the Wild West where you're drawing on various bandits or gunslingers. And I just recently picked up a CRT television, and so I thought this game would be a fun one to try because, let's face it, if you're a young kid especially if you're a young boy and you've watched a Western or something like that, and you're finding yourself in front of a mirror, I think just about everybody at one point puts their hand at their side, and then they try to quick draw. I don't know, and in a silly attempt to try to beat the person in the mirror. And that's really what the game does. It gives you that opportunity to see how fast you are, and when you draw. And I don't know, I just thought that'd be a fun one to play. Unfortunately, my zapper does not. I think it's because of the system I'm using. I'm using a old school Classic 2 console, and for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to read the zapper signal, so those games aren't working on my CRT. So I'm going to have to continue to work to figure that one out. But as soon as I do, I hope to get Wild Gunman going because I think that'd be a fun one to play. Okay, our last Nintendo tape or Nintendo game is Sunsoft's Super Spy Hunter. And this is a really cool game. The person that I guess I could say gave me the want to purchase it was John Blue Riggs, he's a really great guy. The kind of guy that I feel like he'd just be fun to hang around with. But anyways, John Blue Riggs was giving kind of a review of, I guess, games he felt were underrated or whatever. And I don't know, if you want to use the term hidden gems or whatever. But this is a game that I think is so much better than the original. Spy Hunter, of course, is a classic arcade port that was brought to the Nintendo. And I have the original Spy Hunter, also, of course, made by Sunsoft. And it's a good game, and it's a game that, I think for a lot of you, or for those of you that grew up in that generation, you probably at least knew at least one friend that had Spy Hunter. Okay, but I can bet that probably very, very few of you probably knew a person at that time that ever had Super Spy Hunter, the sequel. And in every single possible way, Super Spy Hunter is better than the original. One, the controls are much tighter. Two, there's more variety to it. One of the cool things that I think that this game did was, instead of just being on kind of a vertical track, this one did some kind of visual effects to allow you to have curves in the road. There's water levels in it, and there's a lot more weapon options that were not in the original. And it's just really, really well done. The music's fantastic because it's Sunsoft. That's one of Sunsoft's, I guess you'd say, strengths was always their music in their games. And this one doesn't disappoint that way at all. And this game is a lot of fun. And again, it's not one you've seen in the wild too much. It goes for a little under $40, but I think it's worth it. I think it's I think if you enjoyed Spy Hunter, that's one of those games where you remember Spy Hunter as a kid and you have fond memories of it, but then you play it now and you're like, this game kind of sucks. Well, if you have that experience, which Spy Hunter probably didn't set you back too much, give Super Spy Hunter a try, and you'll be glad you paid that extra money, because it's everything the original Spy Hunter should have been, to be perfectly honest. So this one's a real treat. Super Spy Hunter. So that does it for my Nintendo games or Nintendo tapes that I picked up in the last few months. But I have picked up some other games for other systems, so this is going to kind of be a hodgepodge of different stuff. So we'll start off with this one, and I'll tell you why I purchased it. This game is the closest thing, I think, to almost like a magic version of an acid trip that I can think of. Or not magic version, a video game version of an acid trip that I can ever think of. This is the Lawnmower Man, which is, of course, was based on the movie The Lawnmower Man. And I remember hearing about that movie. I will admit I have not seen it. To sum up the plot real quick, it's about a person, I guess you could say, he's cognitively challenged, who, because he's cognitively challenged, he's limited in his employment opportunities. And so what he mainly does to make ends meet is he mows lawns. Hence, he's called Lawnmower Man. Well, a neighbor of his decided what a perfect person to run this new experiment using virtual reality. And for those of you that grew up during the late to mid 90s or mid to late 90s, virtual reality was seen, of course, as like the great frontier of just about everything. Now, the funny thing was, for us that remember this, was that after about, I'd say about 5 years, then virtual reality went away, and it was kind of something you could like bring up to your friends and chuckle about, like, remember virtual reality? And everyone's like, yeah, that you wore like this big headset, and for the most part the experiences were pretty underwhelming and disappointing. But of course, in more recent years, they've improved that technology so much more that they really can create that, what virtual reality had hoped to become, which was an alternate reality that you could live in. Really the closest thing that we can get to like a holodeck from Star Trek Next Generation, of living in a virtual world. And the Lawnmower Man was supposed to be about this experiment, and long story short, it was supposed to be a military program, and the Lawnmower Man character becomes kind of this villain. So the game is set where you're kind of popping in and out of reality and then to the virtual world. So there's parts of it where you're like with like a first person perspective, and then there's other parts where you're just like in a very, very simplistic 2D platformer. I mean, the 2D platforming stuff is actually Nintendo quality at best, which for a 16-bit system is pretty disappointing. But the virtual stuff in the game is, I don't know, it's somewhere between crap and actually kind of impressive, which is a weird thing to say. So it kind of varies with the different levels you play. But overall, the game is very confusing. And while I think it's probably trying to stay as close to the film as it can, with little scenes, and they don't really use like cutscenes like video, but they do use pictures or images from the film, including the cover art, which is the villain guy that you see on the cover. But otherwise, it's a really bizarro game, and I picked it up mainly because there's the guy who plays the Lawnmower Man was a guy from Lost, and I saw that he had credits for this Genesis game, and I thought, oh, cool, I'd like this. And it was cheap. This game complete in box is like $10. So, and mind you, my copy looks like it's been chewed on by a dog, but it's pretty cheap. And I don't know, it's a really weird game. If you want a game where if you want a game that gives you all the feelings of an acid trip, give Lawnmower Man a try. Like I said, if you have any questions, comments, whatever, please, say whatever you want in the chat. I'll try to respond. I mean, this is pretty low stress stuff. Okay, I'm gonna show this one next. This is Twin Cobra. Twin Cobra by for the Genesis, and you can see it is a black. The grid pattern, so like early 90s, or maybe late 1991 actually. So early 90s Genesis game. This is a Toa Plan shooter. I already mentioned before that Twin Cobra was for the NES and it was on American Sammy. This is basically just like an upgraded version. It's the same game where, in this case, a Huey Super Cobra helicopter, attack helicopter, doing your thing. And it's just a little better. The music's better, the effects are better, but overall the gameplay is very similar. So if you play Twin Cobra, which is one of the better vertical scrolling shooters for the NES, this is a pretty decent upgrade of that for the Genesis. But overall, the gameplay is very, very similar. So if you like that or you enjoyed that, this is a good get. The game is not particularly rare, but you may have to dig a little bit for it. Complete in box, it's about $30, but it's an okay game. And again, it's Toa Plan, and Toa Plan knows how to make a pretty good shooter. Okay. This next game, I kind of gained awareness from this while watching an episode of Gaming Historian. In fact, I'll put a link to that in the show description as well. And he was talking about this failed attempt for the company called Tengen to create kind of a mascot for itself. So if Nintendo, of course, had Mario as its mascot, and Sega, of course, has Sonic the Hedgehog as its mascot, Tengen wanted to establish its own. And so what they ultimately decided upon was this character called Awesome Possum. And without going further, the story of Awesome Possum is pretty intriguing, especially when you consider how it led to like a big lawsuit, and also how a character, was created long before it ever really became a video game. In other words, this was a childhood vision that eventually came to life in this video game. And they tried to be unique in the fact that he had a pro-environment kind of angle to him. And the game itself gets mocked a lot for how annoying Awesome Possum is. But the funny thing is, as they would say even in the Gaming Historian episode, when they developed this game, it almost kind of had an awareness that the game was annoying that way, with all the things that Awesome Possum would say to you as he would get hurt, or the things he was doing. So you could you could adjust the talkativeness, or I guess say the amount of how much Awesome Possum would talk at you. In other words, you could set it so that Awesome Possum almost never said anything, or you could have it where he was talking and being annoying all the time, whatever your preference was. The game itself is a platformer, kind of similar to Sonic the Hedgehog, or almost kind of like Cool Spot if you've ever played that. and it's okay. And then in between levels, they would have kind of like this environmental quiz. Like they would ask questions about like recycling or pollution as an effort to improve environmental awareness. And I think that was a noble idea by them to, not just use their mascot to try to sell Tengen games, but to try to reach to kids to try to create a greater environmental awareness. And that was a noble thing to do. But it kind of, in some ways, it kind of detracts from the rest of it. And the gameplay itself is average to below average. While it was interesting to play because I learned about the story, of course, Awesome Possum would become more of a notorious failure because Tengen didn't last much longer after Awesome Possum's release. But it was a noble attempt to try to get involved, but they were just really late to the game, and Awesome Possum just wasn't quite endearing enough to make it happen. Whereas, Mario and Sonic the Hedgehog were tremendously likable characters. Awesome Possum was like the Eddie Haskell of mascots, the one you love to hate, and that's not a good thing when you're trying to make a character that you're hoping to be a mascot. If people want to punch it in the face, it probably doesn't bode well for using them as a promotional tool. So it's an interesting game. At times it can look really nice and colorful, where you'll actually almost be impressed by how it looks. But then the gameplay though and kind of what you do is really just repetitive, including parts where it's kind of like where it gives you chances to like bypass a lot of the obstacles and enemies, and you're kind of saying to yourself, like, what's the point? So I don't know, but I'll put that link to the gaming historian thing because I do think that's a really cool story. And I don't know, I just felt that I wanted to pick it up, partly, and not necessarily because of that gaming historian episode. The game has become a little bit more difficult to find, but it's easily had. $30 or $40, you can get it probably in box. So Awesome Possum. And the full title is Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt, which I don't know. That's a lot. That's a whole lot to say. Probably more than they should. So there's that. So our last Genesis / Mega Drive game is Mega Drive's Zero Wing. Mega Drive, this of course was mostly marketed towards Japan and Europe, and this is a Toa Plan shooter. Really well done, colorful and kind of unique, where you kind of have the options that you normally talk about, like, you guys usually use that Gradius terminology. Your little helper ships, if you want to use that as well. They're kind of already built in, and it makes for kind of a unique experience. I actually purchased from a seller in England. One thing I did learn on its journey, which I thought was crazy, I don't know if you guys track packages when you purchase things, but I do, because I'm always worried about, when is it going to come in, and, where is it? Well, I don't know how shipping systems work, but this seems terribly inefficient if what I saw was correct. So this game came from England, and it took about 3 weeks to make its way across the Atlantic Ocean. And then it went to, from New York, it went all the way to Los Angeles, where it stayed in Los Angeles for a week or so. And then it went from Los Angeles to Chicago. And then it took almost another week to 2 weeks from Chicago to finally make it to me. Now, I live in South Central Wisconsin, so it seems like a terribly inefficient way to move anything if you're going from England all the way to Los Angeles, California, and then all the way back to the Midwest. I don't know. I mean, since we're talking about our environment, that doesn't seem very green to me to transport it those extra thousands of miles just to bring it back to the upper Midwest. But I don't know how shipping works, but this thing traveled a long, long way to get here, a lot longer than it should have. But I don't know, fun one anyways. Okay, now we're down to our last three games. So I went on a trip recently up north, and so I bring up with myself is my Nintendo Switch, and this is a game called Everspace. Everspace came out about 2 years ago, and it's a kind of a flight simulator game, and you're kind of almost I don't want to call yourself necessarily you're almost like a privateer, so kind of almost like a pirate. You have to be careful about what you attack, but you attack other ships. And when you break them up, then you can like take their equipment and improve your own ship. The displays and the graphics in the game are incredibly impressive. I have not played this on a television, so I've just had it on my small Switch screen, but it's very impressive looking, almost like what I remember from like computer space flight simulator games, like, you know, whether it be like TIE Fighter or Wing Commander. Very well done, very polished, and a game I just started to play, but definitely a good one. And I think I only paid about $30 for it, but definitely a cool one to find. And I know you can get it on a digital copy too, if that's what you're into. Okay, another game, I remember seeing this on Metal Jesus' channel of Twitch or Nintendo Switch pickups, and this game is incredible. And my wife doesn't play a lot of video games, but when she does, she typically gravitates towards puzzle games. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe a way to get her into some other games is not just giving her a puzzle game, which she enjoys, but maybe have her try a puzzle platformer, which is exactly what Unraveled 2 is. This was another game. I also believe it was maybe made in, I want to say Denmark again, or the Netherlands. And this is 100% family friendly. I know I have other friends that have Nintendo Switches, and they play this with their families because there's nothing, you know, vicious or violent about it. And it's really kind of a game where you have to use your mind to solve problems to get your way from one side of the level to the other. And you use it kind of as this little group of partners that are little strings of yarn people. And it's really smart. I really think it's unique. I don't know. I enjoy it a lot. It's kind of one of those games where you can work your way through it. They definitely can be challenging and at times frustrating, but the game itself is I mean, I have to admit, it may be a simple concept, but it provides enough variety and uniqueness to keep you wanting to come back for more. And this is the sequel after they had an initial, I think, digital success. But it's a really fun game, and I would definitely recommend this for anybody, especially if you have a family, because you could probably play this with young kids and have a lot of fun right along with your kids as you go through the levels. It's pretty cool. So, Unravel 2. Okay, and now for my last game. This is Bare Knuckle 4, or better known probably as Streets of Rage 4, which was a bringback by Limited Run Games. Now, some of you are saying Bare Knuckle 4. I never Streets of Rage 4. Well, you're right. Like a lot of PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 3 games, there are alternative covers. If you just flip it on the inside, you'll see an alternative cover. So it did say Streets of Rage 4, but I thought, so that's what the original cover art looks like. So I switched it so that it's the Bare Knuckle cover because Streets of Rage was known as Bare Knuckle in Japan. And I don't know, I just thought it'd be cool to use that side of it. And they got a lot of the original development staff to go over this game to create a brand new beat 'em up, including it also with the collector's edition that I also have the soundtrack to Streets of Rage 4, Bare Knuckle 4, as well with the original like composer Yuzo Koshiro. And I haven't played this one yet, but I've heard mostly good things of it. Limited Run really had their deliveries last week for Bare Knuckle 4. Even though the digital, which came out on the Switch, happened months ago, but pretty cool that it came in, and I can't wait to play it. So those are my pickups for July. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me either on Twitter @CreaseAndAssist, or leave a comment in the comments section below, and I'll answer it as soon as I can. But either way, stay cool. Enjoy the rest of July. I'll be streaming probably sometime soon, and we'll see you next time.